What is happening in America? We have become two people in one nation, two people morally and two people ideologically. Half our people want more liberty and less government, a return to our Constitution being the supreme law of the land, a return to natural law put in place by nature's God. People who believe our natural rights cannot be overruled by the laws and mandates of men. People who see their country being subverted ideologically and whose children are being indoctrinated and attacked daily by depravity like Drag Queen Story Hour. And this all stems from beliefs that swallowed up some 100 million or more people in the 20th century. Yes, I'm talking about communism. Now, the other half of the country, of whom have embraced this bigger government, are now calling on an even bigger government to bring in the socialist policies they so yearn for. People are now calling for this government to enforce laws on speech, laws against the right of self-preservation, the right to own arms, to defend yourself and your country against enemies both foreign and domestic. They're calling on restriction on arms to defend your family against those who seek to harm you. A people who say America needs to change its outdated constitution, who say our entire system is flawed and government needs to step in to prioritize some groups over others due to systemic racism. But our Constitution is only a piece of parchment which recognizes our natural rights. Rights that cannot be trampled upon. If men do trample on those rights or governments, nature's law says we have the right to defend ourselves and throw off such government. Our founders called these the laws of nature and of nature's God, aka natural law, which is what I continue to refer to. Now, although it may seem like it's the majority who have embraced the latter of the two people of our country has become, it isn't so. Remember, just because mainstream media, Hollywood, all these large corporations and these elites seem to embrace this authoritarian ideology really doesn't mean that the majority of America has. Most Americans just want to be left alone. And the establishment owns all those things and thus uses them as a tool for tyranny to make it seem as though their narrative is the mainstream one. But why? Why would large companies, mainstream media, and all these other institutions, including colleges, push for something that's obviously the antithesis of liberty? Why are rich men who've made their money abusing crony capitalism and these large foundations like the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation, and the Carnegie Endowment, who are all tax exempt, pushing for socialism and communism? Well, if you look into it, the answer's simple. It's more central control, more power, and even bigger government. The useful idiots might think they'll get their utopia, but when in the world have you ever seen a communist utopia? When has anyone ever stepped down from power? Think about it. They always use their vast central government and powers to make themselves even more powerful and always destroy any little people that help them get there during their little revolution. They always obliterate all social norms and the people who built the previous order. The engineers, the college professors, and anyone else they disagree with along those lines that remind them of the old order will basically be destroyed. But make no mistake, we are in a cultural revolution. We're in a cultural Cold War, and it will reach a boiling point eventually and turn into full-blown war. So we must stay vigilant, understand our enemy is key. They use this collectivist groupthink because they know crowds are easily controlled and irrational. You can't entirely blame the people at the lower levels who are doing the bidding of their masters. They become slaves to this system, deceived in every way, even though they believe they're quote-unquote woke. They're just sheeple following their shepherds to the slaughter. We would do better to win over our fellow Americans through dialogue. But all dialogue that isn't their own, they've been taught to shut down lest they legitimize them by even acknowledging the argument. All we can really do is watch, pay attention, know and understand our true enemies. We need to network with each other, prepare together, train together, become ungovernable. Although they've made networking difficult for us because they do own all the platforms that we use to network, we still need to find a way and do so. They've also made us suspicious of one another, even those who we agree with. The first person who talks like a founding father will be ostracized by conservatives even and called a Fed, a glowy, or a Fed boy. They've taught us to live in fear, even to fear one another. We've grown to believe that the all-seeing eye of government is always watching. And as Snowden has showed us, maybe it is. But that shouldn't stop us. Under communism, remember, they did the same thing. That people will turn on each other and rat each other out to the KGB or whichever apparatus the state installed at that time. But it's even happening here now. I mean, during COVID, American citizens were willfully stepping over each other to rat out their fellow Americans to the ever-growing government, just to tell the government who wasn't complying with its mandates or what small businesses weren't following its guidelines. They've divided and conquered us, but it's not too late. You can always wake up from the matrix, restore hope in your brothers and sisters. Stop calling everyone a fed who speaks up against tyranny. Start building communities that prepare and train together. We really need to restore our Minuteman system and be prepared to die on our feet and not live on our knees. Remember, you're free men. If you won't restore liberty for you and your fellow man, then do it for your kids or your grandkids and posterity's sake. We are the last hope in this world for liberty. We're heading down a dark path. We really must restore unity and band together. We need everyone at once to stop complying, and mass non-compliance will stop them. All they can really do is fold or come down hard on us. And if they come down hard on us, they lose the hearts and minds of the people that follow them. They lose the propaganda war. The modern day Tories would even stop following them. They'd lose support and our numbers would grow. Today, we're going to analyze some of the culture war and how it's reported on and just how hypocritical it is. We'll go through it claim by claim. We'll analyze some of these speeches and by these dictatorial maniacs, and we'll pick apart the madness of these authoritarian tyrants and the actions of their useful idiots who destroyed our nation with impunity, mind you. But it's up to you guys to make a difference. Only we the people can fix this. I hate to tell you guys, this might upset people, but Trump cannot save us, nor any one person or being, unless that being is Jesus Christ. Solzhenitsyn said this about the evils that have befallen his nation. Men have forgotten God. That's why all this has happened. Why do you think they work so hard to demonize and remove God from America? Think back. When's the last time you've seen God or Christians portrayed favorably in media or Hollywood or a school, unless it's a private Christian school? It just simply doesn't happen. God has been removed completely, yet you'll see Lucifer, the devil, or evil being portrayed as good. They've literally turned the world upside down. Even Italian communist Antonio Gramsci said this: socialism is precisely the religion that must overwhelm Christianity. And he said that more than 100 years ago. So they've known this for a long time, which is why they worked so hard to remove God from the picture. Anyone grounded in Judeo-Christian values will not submit to communism, which is why communists have always abolished Christianity and why Marxists in America have infiltrated the church. They've been subverting the church from the inside for decades. Any place communism comes to power, it destroys the church. But anyway, enough of me ranting. Let's get into this. First, we'll analyze some speeches by these maniacs. Then we'll take a look at some of these socialists. We'll also take a look at cultural Marxism, what that is, what critical theory is, who funds these movements, the actions of their useful idiots, and the outcome of these policies, wherever and whenever they come to fruition. Lastly, we'll contrast that with liberty, the freedom to do as you damn well please, as long as you're not harming anybody or infringing on anyone else's rights in the process. Little do these crazies know, in a free society, they can have socialist communities somewhere without big government being involved. Most people don't even realize that the first socialist experiment was in America, under the father of socialism, Robert Owen, in New Harmony, Indiana. Although I disagree with it, if it's not harming me, I'm fine with them having a little socialist community somewhere. If it's from the bottom up and not the top down, and they're not infringing upon their neighbors' rights or forcing it on the rest of the country. Now guys, let's get into it. Buckle up. It's going to get long. Parts will be painful to watch, but again, it's important. You must know your enemy. You must never forget what you've been put through and how you've been demonized and how your freedoms have been trampled upon, especially over the last 5 to 10 years. I promise everything will come together in the end. All right, guys. Here we go. First, before we even get into the Dark Brandon speech, we're going to hear a lot about insurrection, but we're not going to hear about this May 29th, I believe it was, insurrection where the president had to be moved to a safe place and they had to shut all the lights off in the White House, and they destroyed Washington, D.C. and tons of other cities that night. And they basically did it with impunity. We don't even hear about it. We never hear about how the communist group, the Weather Underground, bombed the Capitol and tons of other federal buildings and military bases. So I want to play this clip first and just look how they're portrayed as victims. They don't say they're insurrectionists. But anyway, let's get into it.
There were times overnight when Washington was in chaos. There were running battles between protesters and police through the streets. And coursing through the crowd was a seething anger that only built as the evening wore on. Some activists at times pleaded with the police to show restraint.
Why don't you guys stand up against the bad cops?
Kneeling and begging them to see that there is another way than confrontation. What is your message to these police officers?
My message, to treat us like American citizens, to treat us like we matter, to treat us like you're actually here to protect and serve. There's no reason for y'all to pull a gun out on us before actually trying to figure out the situation, to try to understand the situation. I've been shot 9 times so far by rubber bullets. What have I done? I got bum rushed on my knee the same way with my hands up.
And this is just playing out just a few meters here from the White House.
Just cuts them off.
Police officers here trying to keep control. The White House and the president in lockdown. He is barricaded in that building while we've got protesters outside and a row of police officers trying to regain control of the nation's capital. There was vandalism and looting too by a tiny minority.
See? A tiny minority. Go look it up.
And the police briefly lost control of this area around the White House and were forced to make repeated charges. Several buildings were set alight. For some black activists, such acts of violence are themselves a tragedy.
Don't shoot! Don't shoot!
For these largely peaceful protests, powerful and eloquent,
Largely peaceful protests
are in danger of being hijacked by more militant elements.
This destruction is here because a lot of people are upset and they're tired of
the police killing black men. But at the same time, if we want the White House to hear us and be seen, we gotta come together and we gotta kneel. We gotta be peaceful. This, you see all this? No, this is not gonna get the message. They're gonna continue to ignore us because of this.
These street skirmishes lasted for several hours. And this is just one city among dozens across the country that are experiencing this wave of unrest and the re-emergence of deep-seated racial grievances.
Hear our voices, sit down with us, meet us at the table, and meet our demands.
If there is not systemic and radical change to the criminal justice system,
then we can't save you from all the anger that the black people have. It's 400 years of pent-up aggression, 400 years of Jim Crow.
400 years of Jim Crow, right? Tell me you know nothing about history without telling me you know nothing about history.
Of just outright oppression, and we're tired.
Tired of that alt-right Jim Crow oppression from the Democrats.
So it's gonna be a boiling pot, and eventually it's gonna boil over.
there is a sense that America is on edge, tested by a pandemic and by a president who cannot hear the anguish outside of his own residence. Tested most of all by this unfolding racial turmoil.
We must be honest
Let's get into the Dark Brandon speech because we're going to hear a lot about insurrections.
with each other and with ourselves. Too much of what's happening in our country today is not normal.
Yet we'll never hear them condemn this. In fact, they called it
Laura,
peaceful.
what you're seeing behind me is one of multiple locations that have been burning in Kenosha, Wisconsin over the course of the night. A second night since Jacob Blake was seen shot in the back 7 times by a police officer. And what you are seeing now, these images came and come in stark contrast to what we saw over the course of the day.
We'll pick their speeches apart claim by claim and compare them to reality, which was Marxist organized protests.
Daytime hours in Kenosha and into the early evening, which were largely peaceful demonstrations in the face of law enforcement. It wasn't until night fell that things began to get a little bit more contentious. Things were thrown back and forth. Police started using some of those crowd dispersal tactics like tear gas, even playing very loud sounds to push them out. And then what you are seeing, the common theme that ties all of this together, is an expression of anger and frustration over what people feel like has become an all too familiar story playing out in places from across the country, not just
All too familiar, even though it was 9 unarmed black men that were killed that year.
here in Kenosha.
Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans
Even though he claims the speech is about unity, we're going to hear MAGA Republican about 1,000 times.
represent an extremism that threatens the very foundations of our republic.
Let's take a look at the extremism that he fails to mention. I'm shocked he remembered that we're a republic.
The 100 protesters have been arrested. Journalists say they have been assaulted. It's a volatile situation. Elsewhere in the US, there's been violent riots, looting, arson. As far-left agitators attack businesses and police stations. Enter Democratic Congresswoman Maxine Waters. Here's what she had to say to protesters. She told them to get more confrontational.
What happens if we do not get what you just told? What should the people do? What should protesters on the street do?
I didn't hear you.
What happens?
What should protesters do?
Well, we got to stay on the street, and we've got to get more active. We've got to get more confrontational. We've got to make sure that they know that we mean business.
Unbelievable. This is the same Maxine Waters who savaged Donald Trump, accusing him of inciting the January 6 riots.
Now, I want to be very clear up front. Not every Republican, not even the majority of Republicans are MAGA Republicans.
Yeah, they
Not
are.
every Republican embraces their extreme ideology. I know, because I've been able to work with these mainstream Republicans.
Who's he worked with? Uniparty establishment hacks like Romney and rhinos?
But there's no question that the Republican Party today is dominated, driven, and intimidated by Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans.
We're like 2 minutes in and we hear MAGA Republicans 4 times.
And that is a threat to this country. These are hard things.
That's what she said.
But I'm an American president, Not a president of red America, blue America, but of all America.
After just singling out a majority of Americans.
And I believe it's my duty to level with you, to tell the truth, no matter how difficult.
We'll see about that.
No matter how painful. And here, in my view, is what is true. MAGA Republicans do not respect.
What about all America?
The Constitution.
Let's hear S2 Underground tell us about one of Biden's latest unconstitutional laws.
In Washington, D.C., the FCC votes to implement Biden's plans to further restrict Internet access and communications. The list of powers granted to the FCC under this new mandate are nearly infinite, with the current FCC commissioner stating, quote, "The Biden administration's plan empowers the FCC to regulate every aspect of the Internet sector for the first time ever." And that, quote, "it reads like a planning document drawn up in the faculty lounge of a university's Soviet Studies department."
Even the current FCC commissioner is saying this is a Soviet-style law, and the law benefits the FCC.
They do not believe in the rule of law.
Let's take a look at their track record on the rule of law.
The gathering on January 6th was supposed to be a peaceful event. Make no mistake about that. And the overwhelming majority of those in attendance remained peaceful. As everyone knows, the president had spoken at hundreds of large rallies across the country over the past 5 years. There had never been any mob-like or riotous behaviors, and in fact, a significant portion of each event was devoted to celebrating the rule of law, protecting our Constitution, and honoring the men and women of law enforcement. Contrast the president's repeated...
And at the time that was recorded, they had no idea how many feds were actually involved that day.
You could say deep state actors within the federal government to set the stage for what happened in J4, 5, and 6, and to entrap thousands of Americans from across the country and lure them into this set stage on J4, 5, and 6. The people that were involved in that is quite a large web. So yes, sir, we do have a great deal of evidence compiled, and we're gradually, professionally rolling that evidence out.
So you sort of answered the question right there in larger terms. You just said that elements within the federal government, I assume law enforcement, intel, and military, and I'm using your words, lured Americans to Washington into what you called a trap.
Yes, sir.
Condemnations of violence with the rhetoric from his opponents.
I am your president of law and order and an ally of all peaceful protesters.
The vast majority
Even the camera lags when he talks.
of the protest has been peaceful.
Republicans stand for law and order, and we stand for justice.
I just don't even know why there aren't uprisings all over the country, and maybe there will be.
My administration will always stand against violence, mayhem, and disorder.
There needs to be unrest in the streets for as long as there's unrest in our lives.
I stand with the heroes of law.
Don't ever forget this.
We will never defund our police. Together we will ensure that America is a nation of law and order.
We were in high school, I'd take him behind the gym and beat the hell out of him.
But I think you need to go back and punch him in the face. Feel like punching him.
Imagine those three cucks throwing a punch.
Okay, what are you doing?
I'm sorry. I used to be much stronger.
We just want law and order. Everybody wants that. I want to tell you, Gorsuch, I want to tell you, Kavanaugh, you have released the whirlwind, and
Shut
you
up.
will pay the price. We want law and order. We have to have law and order.
Show me where it says that protests are supposed to be polite and peaceful.
Well, they did not recognize the will of the people.
The will of the communists who want to throw away the Constitution? Or the will of these people? Remember these creeps? There would have been martial law if conservatives took over 3 square city blocks. Instead, this was called the Summer of Love. That's what I call a 2-tier justice system.
So the police station, from what I understand, the police deoccupied this station. They had been defending it for about a week, a little more than that. But yeah, they have, from what I understand, vacated the station, and people are out in the streets in front of it, continuing to protest.
People want to turn the police station into a community center, which I'm so here for.
Now that they're gone, we're just going to show them this is all we wanted. We just wanted a good time, and that's all it is now.
Here's the thing. In reality, if somebody pulled out a gun and shot somebody else, they'd call 911 and the cops would come and arrest them. So is it really a completely separate government? No, it's really not.
We'll put that theory to the test in these next 2 clips.
But if the cops are going to withdraw, it's a power vacuum. People are going to say, okay, we'll run things then.
There's no looting, there's no violence here. This is really a peaceful zone.
I guess the sexual assaults and shootings didn't happen yet.
And so really these 3 blocks kind of in every direction from where I'm standing, there are barricades, there are people keeping watch and making sure everyone is safe.
My name is Keith Brown. I'm an electrician, but as of right now, I'm a guard because I had to quit my...
Please, not Keith the electrician, anybody but him.
Video shows the moment officers responded to Seattle's so-called CHOP, or the Capitol Hill Organized Protest Zone. Police say 2 people were shot and 1 was killed. Good evening, I'm Vanessa Mashania. 1 person is dead tonight and another is critically injured after a shooting happened inside that protest zone. Police tell us they tried to help the shooting victims but were met by a crowd. Our Amy Marino joins us live.
Well, so much for police responding.
From the CHOP with the latest. Amy.
The CHOP.
Well, police released video late this afternoon where they could be heard asking the crowd to step back so they can get access to the victims. They say the crowd did not allow them access. Eventually, both people were taken to the hospital by medics here from the CHOP. One man is still in critical condition tonight, and there are new concerns about whether or not police can get inside when there's a crisis situation. This video captured by somebody in the CHOP zone shows the chaotic scene. It was around 2:30 in the morning when shots were fired. Police tried to respond to 911 calls, but were met with a crowd that pushed back, demanding that officers stay out.
An ambulance can even come in until the scene's secure.
Alex Bennett was just walking her dog when she came across one of the victims.
I saw 1 gunshot wound on his arm, so I took off my sweatshirt and tied it around his arm above where the gunshot wound was so I could make a tourniquet to try to keep the bleeding down.
This is why in the prepared community we always carry 2 tourniquets.
Bennett used to be a nurse and said she and CHOP medical crews tried to help. She said somebody called 911, but they were told paramedics couldn't come because police were being blocked from entering. CHOP medics brought a van to take him to the hospital, and then they spent several minutes looking for a backboard.
I finally was just like, he is really going into shock. Like, I just need like a few guys to help me. We're just gonna lift him up. And so we just picked him up and got him into the back of the van.
Bennett said she and others rode to Harborview with the back of the van open. At times, she had to grip another woman to make sure that she didn't fall out. She supports the protests, but believes precious time was lost.
If an ambulance could have come, he would have been there a lot sooner.
But they couldn't because you wouldn't let them respond.
And he, I think, would probably have been in a lot better shape.
And I heard some arguments.
Let's hear the people who stand for justice lie about shooting kids.
Can you hear that?
I hope people are keeping track of the hypocrisy.
Breaking news in the so-called Capitol Hill organized protest zone. There's been yet another shooting. Early this morning, protesters finished a march back to Cal Anderson Park when they say gunshots were fired nearby. You could hear it on that live stream there. Several protesters were streaming it live at the time, but the supposed gunfire did not stop there. We have
Summer of Love, folks.
Team coverage this morning on this breaking news. First King 5 Kayla Lafferty joining us now live in the CHOP zone, or just on the outskirts of it safely. Kayla, what are you learning? It looks like the SUV is now behind you.
Yeah, so that is the big thing that's here right now. You can see that white Jeep that we've been reporting on all morning long is still here on scene. One of the big things we're noticing, there are a lot of bullet holes in this car. There's still some medical supplies on scene as well on the other end. The bumper is ripped off the car. It has been taped off by some of the members of CHOP this morning, but most of the information that we did learn was from those live streams that we mentioned. From Converge Media in particular, they talked to some protesters from CHOP who say the white Jeep drove through Cal Anderson and toward one of the barricades. At some point there were shots fired, and Omari Salisbury with Converge Media reports that CHOP security shot at those people in the Jeep after they ran into the barricades here. And we can see in the video, of course, and as we just showed you, there are bullet holes, the windows are broken out, the bumper is ripped off there. People on scene say some of the protesters within CHOP pulled two people with gunshot wounds out of that Jeep and rendered aid to them. And this wasn't the first report of gunfire over last night. At about 1:15, there were loud bangs as well that went off at 11th and Olive. Some people at first thought they were fireworks, and people later thought that they were gunshots. And then the confirmed shooting, of course, happened at 3 a.m. And here's a clip from Converge Media's live stream just after the shooting, breaking down what they say happened.
This vehicle right here was driving around the neighborhood and did a drive-by shooting.
Not true.
And then came through and crashed through the barricade. That would be the southern barricade.
These were teens that got killed, and they're not even covering it like it's a crime.
The one that borders Pike Street. When the vehicle came through and crashed through the barricade, the vehicle was met by force.
They refuse to accept the results of a free election, and they're working right now, as I speak, in state after state.
Let's put that claim to the test.
Imagine telling your supporters that the only way you could possibly lose is if an American election was rigged and stolen from you. And ask yourself whether you've ever seen anyone at any level of government make the same claim about their own election.
Let me think back. Oh, wait, there was this.
If Stacey Abrams doesn't win in Georgia, they stole it. It's clear. It's clear. And I say that publicly, it's clear.
You can run the best campaign. You can even become the nominee. And you can have the election stolen from you.
He knows he's an illegitimate president. He knows that there were a bunch of different reasons why the election turned out the way it did.
Votes remain to be counted. There are voices that were waiting to be heard.
And I will not concede.
And I respect where you're coming from, and I respect the issues that you're raising. You're not answering the question. Do you think it was... You're not using the word legitimate.
There are still legitimate concerns over the integrity of our elections and of ensuring the principle of one person, one vote.
I agree with tens of millions of Americans who are very worried that when they cast the ballot on an electronic voting machine, that there is no paper trail to record that vote.
Look at friggin' Bernie being a right-wing MAGA extremist.
But constantly shifting vote tallies in Ohio and malfunctioning electronic machines which may not have paper receipts have led to additional loss of confidence by the public. This is their only opportunity to have this debate while the country is listening, and it is appropriate to do so.
Election deniers.
Give power to decide elections in America to partisans and cronies, empowering election deniers to undermine democracy itself. MAGA forces are determined
MAGA again
to take this country backwards to an America where there is no right to choose, no right to privacy.
Well, since he brought up an actual right, the right to privacy, let's take a look at what his regime has been doing to Trump supporters and anybody they disagree with, and we'll look at what the feds have been doing to 2A supporters for a long time.
The TSA's Quiet Skies watch list program has reportedly expanded to include the family members of J6 participants. This came to light after A.J. Fisher's family, a J6 defendant, noticed the secret TSA codes on his infant child's boarding pass. Analysts comment, though this specific incident relies on single-source reporting at the moment, it is worthy of consideration as this event highlights the continued targeting of J6 participants. This targeting and the expansion of investigations, arrests, and raids has continued with virtually zero mainstream media coverage. The Quiet Skies program is a substantial TSA surveillance program that was revealed to the public in 2018 after years of secrecy. Anyone flying in the United States can check their boarding pass for special characters, such as 4 S's, which indicates they have been flagged as being a national security risk and will likely be subjected to additional screening.
People who were in D.C. on J6 for work were even put on lists. Now let's go back and look how in the past Democrats and the FBI have been going after and trying to infiltrate 2A groups.
By the way, Andreas Strassmeyer is the son of Gunter Strassmeyer, who was the chief of staff for Helmut Kohl, the former premier of Germany. He was the equivalent of the president of Germany. And what in the world? We found out that actually it was Al Gore.
Another Democrat trampling on the Constitution.
That requested the German government send Andreas Strassmeyer to the United States to infiltrate neo-Nazi groups in the U.S. Well, the FBI caught wind of that and pretty much geared it toward their efforts to set up, gun rights and Second Amendment people that supported that sort of movement in a very good way. These people weren't fanatics, but it was Strassmeyer was there to basically stir the pot. And Jesse Trinidad is a quote in the film is like, you have these guys trying to infiltrate these groups of 6 guys, and you find out 4 of them working for the U.S. government. I mean, it was a fix.
And then more recently, there was this.
So to find that level of conspiratorial corruption at the highest levels of the FBI has been very troubling to me as a man, as a cop. And yet, you follow the evidence wherever it leads. And
yes,
this is what investigators do. So when I asked Christopher Wray that question, for instance, I already knew the answer. I had reviewed compelling evidence that the FBI had assets, human assets, dressed as Trump supporters inside the Capitol prior to the doors being open and the masses allowed in. So I knew that the FBI was deeply involved. I'd seen evidence, even at that time, with that the FBI had embedded themselves into various groups online across the country of Americans who were essentially voicing their concerns and airing their grievances with each other about COVID oppression. And those Americans were targeted by the FBI, almost universally Republicans and largely Trump supporters, but the FBI worked undercover to infiltrate those conversations and become a significant part of those individual Americans' communications. And when you dig into the evidence that we've had revealed through some criminal cases that I've followed and worked with the families of J6 political detainees and Americans that have been persecuted for their involvement in the Capitol that day, and some of that evidence is shockingly reveals that the FBI agents that were operating undercover within the online groups across the country were the first ones to plant the seeds of suggestions of a more radical occupation of the Capitol.
No right to contraception, no right to marry who you love.
I'm glad he brought up the right to marry who you love, because in the past he had a lot of things to say about it.
The world's going to Hades in a handbasket. We are desperately concerned about the circumstance relating to avian flu. We don't have enough vaccines. We don't have enough police officers. And we're going to debate the next 3 weeks, I'm told, gay marriage a flag amendment, and God only knows what else. I can't believe the American people can't see through this. We already have a law, the Defense of Marriage Act, where we've all voted, not where I voted and others said, look, marriage is between a man and a woman, and states must respect that. Nobody's violated that law. There's been no challenge to that law.
That was back when he can form coherent sentences.
They promote authoritarian leaders and they fan the flames of political violence that are a threat to our personal rights.
Yet, how often have we seen Democrats fanning the flames of violence?
To the pursuit of justice, to the rule of law, to the very soul of this country. They look at the mob that stormed the United States Capitol on January 6th, brutally attacking law enforcement, not as insurrectionists who placed a dagger at the throat of our democracy, but they look at them as patriots. And they see their MAGA failure to stop a peaceful transfer of power after the 2020 election.
The most armed society on earth with the biggest stockpile of ammunition went all the way there to overturn the government without a single firearm. Now, does that logic make any sense? And now they're trying to use this against Trump so he can't even run in certain states.
Love kids jumping on my lap.
No idea how that got there. Let's hear from the fighters.
I'm a fighter and I'm relentless, but I'm a fighter and I'm relentless. A fighter and I'm relentless. I will fight like hell.
But the way I see it now is that we pick ourselves up and we fight back. That's what I think it's all about. We stand up and we fight back. We do not back down.
Take their names off the ballots for inciting insurrections. Let's speed this up.
We do not compromise, not today, not tomorrow, not ever. You can either lie down, you can whimper, you can pull up at a ball, you can
what is that odd fake whimper?
And fight back. And that's what it's about. We do fight back, but we are going to fight back. We are not turning this country over to what Donald Trump has sold. We are just not. Look, people are upset and they're right to be upset. Now we can whimper, we can whine, or we can fight back. Me, I'm here to fight back. I'm here to fight back because we will not forget. We do not want to forget. We will use that vision to make sure that we fight harder, we fight tougher, and we fight more passionately for than ever. We still have a fight on our hands. Fight hard for the changes Americans are demanding. Get in the fight, to winning the fight, fighting. To use every tool possible to fight for this change. We'll fight, to fight fighting hard. Serious. We fight back. I'm in this fight. I am fighting. Get in this fight. Get in this fight. Get in this fight. And fighting, we all need to be in the fight. We all need to stay in the fight. We stay in this fight. We fought back. I am not afraid of a fight. I am in this fight all the way. You don't get what you don't fight for. Our fight. We are in this fight for our lives. This is the fight of our lives.
But we are going to make sure that this fight does not end tonight.
This is a fight for our lives, the lives of our friends and family members and neighbors. It is a fight.
That was a lot of fighting. Now listen in the background of this speech to how the people of Philly are reacting and what they're chanting to Biden.
As preparation for the 2022 and 2024 elections, they tried everything last time to nullify the votes of 81 million people.
Well, you know, he is indeed the most popular president ever.
This time, they're determined to succeed in thwarting the will of the people. That's why respected conservatives like Federal Circuit Court Judge Michael Ludwig has called
what the hell did he say?
Trump and the extreme MAGA Republicans
again
and present danger to our democracy. But while the threat to American democracy is real, I want to say as clearly as we can, we are not powerless in the face of these threats. We are not bystanders in this ongoing attack on democracy.
We're a republic, and what I say is a two-tier justice system where the Justice Department is being used against those that don't agree with.
This is a nation that believes in the rule of law. We do not repudiate it.
Do they really, though, believe in the rule of law? Crazy Eyes, take it away.
We've been talking about defunding the police.
There's some issues that we ask police to do, like mental health issues or policing in schools and all the rest, that perhaps we can shuffle some of
Wants
that
to get
money
rid of police
around.
in schools.
Suck it up. Defunding the police has to happen. We need to defund the police.
Mayor Eric Garcetti saying, take some of the money from policing, about $150 million.
I applaud Eric Garcetti for doing what he's done.
Funding isn't necessarily as aggressive as a lot of folks paint it. You know, school budgets get cut almost every year.
Not only do we need to disinvest in police, but we need to completely dismantle the Minneapolis Police Department.
So yes to some defunding.
we have to reallocate resources. So yes.
Would you echo calls from some Black Lives Matter activists to defund the police?
Well, I think now is the time that we need to actually do that work.
It is.
It's a nation that believes in the rule of law. We cannot repudiate it.
Well, so much for the rule of law.
Outdated. It is wrong-headed thinking to think that the only
Is that
way
even a
you're
real
gonna get
phrase?
communities to be safe is to put more police officers on the street. So yes, defund your butts. Defund you. We do.
Ugh, looks like Sloth and Herman Munster had a baby.
We need to reimagine how we are dispatched to these scenes in terms of what's the best tool to bring.
Again. Look, it's Soros-funded Krasner, the guy who went easy on crime and destroyed Philly.
And what I mean by defund the police is not take all funds from the police. It is a reduction of the funding going into the police department.
They are talking about reducing the allocation of resources to that department. And I think every single city in this country ought to be thinking about the same thing.
Ah, Jamal Bowman. We got a great clip of Jamal. How nuts are these people? I mean, it really takes balls to do this. I mean, at least they're trying. The other side ain't.
I support the reallocation of resources from NYPD.
We will be moving funding from the NYPD to youth initiatives and social services.
Yes, I support the defund movement. I'm for responsible reallocation of resources.
And defund the police.
I think you do all those other things, you don't need all the money that's going to the police department. So yeah, I mean, the spirit of it, I do.
This is a nation that respects free and fair elections. We honor the will of the people. We do not deny it.
Again, let's see how much they honor free and fair elections.
Manager Raskin, you'd been in Congress only 3 days when you objected in 2017. It's one of the first
3
things you did
days.
when you got here.
I have an objection because 10 of the 29 electoral votes cast by Florida were cast by electors not lawfully certified.
Electoral votes.
The objection is in writing, and I don't care that it is not signed by a member of the Senate. I do not wish to debate. I wish to ask, is there one United States senator who will join me in this letter?
She's like 98, but she's got a ton of energy.
If you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome.
They love projecting what they do onto others.
The people are going to turn on them. They're going to protest. They're going to absolutely harass them until they decide that they're going to tell the president, no, I can't hang with you.
No debate. And this is a nation that rejects violence as a political tool.
Let's hear again how they reject it as a political tool.
Are going to turn on them. They're going to protest. They're going to absolutely harass them until they decide that they're going to tell the president, no, I can't hang with you.
Let's see how the rule of law party bailed out criminals and went easy on crime.
And we're seeing record high levels of crime in every major city. Memphis saw a record high this past year alone. We've got to step up and do something about this. And we've had an administration that prioritizes anything but dealing with crime. In fact, as many of the members of this administration were running for office, I think about Vice President Kamala Harris, she actually raised funds to bail out criminals early. One of those criminals that her fund bailed out just a few weeks ago murdered somebody 3 weeks after being released on bail that now Vice President Harris's fund.
President Kamala Harris, during her 2020 campaign, helped set an accused domestic abuser free. Now, just weeks after his release, he's back behind bars after prosecutors charged him with murder. Senior correspondent Mike Tobin is live for us in our Midwest Bureau. Forgive me. Mike.
Well, having been jailed on domestic violence charges, George Howard posted an $11,500 bail. He did it with the support of the Minnesota Freedom Fund. Now, the Freedom Fund became well known during the riots which followed the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. Politicians and celebs got on board as they were posting bail for those arrested during the riots, and Kamala Harris was one of them, evidenced by a tweet from June of 2020. If you're able to chip in now to the Minnesota Freedom Fund to help post bail for those protesting on the ground in Minnesota, Minnesota. Now, with support like that, the Freedom Fund banked some $35 million and continued to bail people out, stating if a judge determines a person is eligible for bail, they should not be stuck in jail because they don't have the same money others do. Now, one of those bailed out was George Howard, August the 6th. A few weeks later,
You're going to try to tell me that's not DMX?
there was a road rage incident. Damian Ortiz was shot and killed. Howard was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. The Minnesota Freedom Fund acknowledged supporting Howard's bail and tweeted, under new leadership, MFF has implemented changes to its policies and procedures, and we will continue to assess them and to ensure that we are being responsive to the safety and needs of our community.
Look at the most recent debacle from the Rule of Law Party. Check out what Biden's doing now.
One of those offenders is a convicted cocaine trafficker. Queen City News anchor Morgan Francis details tonight James Barber's background and dug into why he was eligible for clemency.
In 2013, the Western District of North Carolina U.S. Attorney's Office announced they rounded up 9 men accused of conspiring to distribute cocaine and 280 grams of crack cocaine in Gaston and Mecklenburg counties. Authorities also seized 3 firearms, $67,000 in cash, drug.
Yet they want your guns and tax money. And letting these guys out.
Paraphernalia and various vehicles. One of those arrested was Gastonia resident James Michael Barber, known as Big Cheese. His drug conspiracy charge carried a statutory mandatory life sentence and a $20 million fine. In 2015, he pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 15 years and 8 months with 5 years of supervised release. In February, however, he'll be a free man. The Biden administration listed Barber as one of 11 who will be granted clemency. The administration has been pardoning simple possession of marijuana charges and commuting sentences of those they say are serving disproportionately long sentences for, quote, nonviolent drug offenses. According to data analytics database LexisNexis, Barber, a repeat offender, was previously convicted of various other narcotics charges and served less than a year in jail. All 11 of these felons were convicted of conspiracy to distribute cocaine and or meth.
It's a good time to be a criminal.
How the Biden administration determines eligibility for commuting sentences isn't clear.
We do not encourage violence.
Yet we just saw them encourage violence and then also bail out those who helped them facilitate it.
We are still an America that believes in honesty and decency.
Are you seeing how this speech is political propaganda that's fueling the fires of the culture war?
There are far more Americans from every background and belief who reject the extreme MAGA ideology than those that accept it.
He doesn't think there's far more Americans who disagree with the gender ideology being pushed on their kids.
And folks, it's within our power, it's in our hands, yours and mine, to stop the assault on American democracy.
All right, enough out of Dark Brandon and his pals. And since they're really pandering to the useful idiots of the Marxist culture war, let's turn our focus there.
And so we are 2 countries now. We are 2 countries morally and socially and culturally and theologically, and cultural wars do not lend themselves to peaceful coexistence. One side prevails or the other prevails, and the truth is that while the conservatives, in my judgment, we won the Cold War with political and economic communism, we've lost the cultural war with cultural Marxism, which I think has prevailed pretty much in the United States, or is now the dominant culture, whereas those of us who are traditionalists, we are, if you will, the counterculture.
Let's pick apart Jabba the Hutt's cultural Marxist speech first. I want to compare J.B. Pritzker's speech first because it's almost verbatim to what cultural Marxist Herbert Marcuse has said in the past. And I don't know if you know this, but J.B. comes from a very powerful family in America. More on that too. But listen to exactly what J.B. says and then to what cultural Marxist Herbert Marcuse says.
We will never surrender in the battle against hate. Racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia, anti-Semitism. We have conquered none of these obscenities. In fact, every effort to call them out has fueled the rise of a new movement devoted to their skillful repackaging. in the hopes that we will be so afraid of being called woke that we will be too exhausted to fight the next resurgence of the world's most persistent and ancient evils.
Now let's focus on the beginning of what he just said and compare it to cultural Marxist Herbert Marcuse.
Herbert Marcuse.
The West is guilty of genocidal crimes against every civilization and culture it has encountered. America and Western civilization are the world's greatest repositories of racism, sexism, nativism, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, fascism, and Nazism. American society is oppressive, evil, and undeserving of loyalty.
Now again, compare that to Jabba the Cock.
Racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia, anti-Semitism. We have conquered none of these obscenities.
If Marcuse wasn't dead, you think he wrote the speech?
Unfortunately, a cancer has spread through one ideological wing of this nation to infect
Good
the
job,
patient
call half the
itself.
country a cancer.
They've had ample opportunity to treat the disease, and they have refused to do so at every turn. The result has been treasonous insurrectionists tearing down the doors of the U.S. Capitol, the maiming of Capitol Police, and an attack on the 82-year-old husband of the Speaker of the House with a hammer in his own home.
The guy with Pelosi was not a conservative. This guy is really nuts. Everything in this speech is pure cultural war propaganda, fueled by cultural Marxism.
There's no nice or easy way to say this, but until the Republican Party is ready to expel the extremists in their midst, we need to do it for them at the ballot box.
He threw in at the ballot box to cover his butt. Now pay attention to how he switches it up.
The fight for democracy, the fight for freedom, the fight for liberty, the fight for decency should be peaceful, but not be timid. It needs to be out loud.
Are you starting to see how insane this has become?
If you see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them.
Sounds like she smoked a pack of hundreds a day for 50 years.
And you tell them they're not welcome.
It should afford no politician a convenient rhetorical hiding place. You don't get to wave a moderate flag from your front porch while you're having a picnic in the backyard with insurrectionists.
Now again, let's compare exactly what he's saying, claim by claim, and compare it to reality. Are these people inciting insurrections?
And I'll have lots of fights ahead of us, and I'm ready to stand up and keep fighting. We have to fight, we're gonna fight, we're gonna fight. We need to fight, and we need to fight. We're gonna fight, we got a few more fights. I'm gonna take the privilege of a few more fights, and we have the biggest fight of all. I will never stop fighting. I will fight like hell to fight back against anyone.
We need to say loud and clear that we are ready to fight.
It's a bare knuckles fight.
Now they're going to have to actually fight back against people.
The fight has to be conducted.
It's so important that we need to fight. Fight that fight.
We have been fighting. I was fighting very hard. Time is of the essence, both in terms of the fight.
I think we should be fighting.
Well, I really believe we need to fight. We're simply not going to take this line down. We're going to keep fighting.
So I'm telling all my colleagues, this is the fight of our life.
Whose side are you on? Who are you fighting for?
They're fighting, I'm fighting. We're both fighting.
We will fight back. We're not going to just take this line down.
I'm just going to keep the fight up.
What we have to do right now is fight as hard as we can. We have to rise up and fight back.
And so we're going to fight, and we're going to continue to fight.
I'm going to be fighting like hell.
Keep fighting, or we kept fighting and we did, so we're going to keep fighting.
We have to be fighting every single day.
We have to fight back, and we have no choice but to do that. I think we're doing the right thing to do that. Fighting.
And I'm fighting.
Well,
But march peacefully and let your voices be heard was treason. We're almost done with his political propaganda speech, and then we're going to get into cultural Marxism and what that is.
And don't claim that the Republican Party is being labeled unfairly. Because
Yeah, don't claim that, and don't claim that the justice system is being used against them while criminals get bailed out.
here we are, 2 years into cleaning up the wreckage of Donald Trump's presidency, poised to watch this man announce his return to...
Well, look at that, guys. They've been cleaning up the country this whole time. Thank God for them. It would have been a dystopian nightmare without them.
National politics within days. You know why? Because GOP politicians, with the exception of only a few souls, are too cowardly.
He means rhinos.
Too simpering to support the best interests of the nation because they're afraid of being called insulting nicknames by a whiny bully. To the fake patriots and their enablers, you don't love the United States if you're not willing to defend it against a man who would destroy it.
What he really means is destroy the Constitution, because that's the only way that they can bring about their communist utopia or socialist utopia. They have to get rid of the Constitution. It's the only way it'll work. And socialists like the founder of the Fabian Socialists, George Bernard Shaw, have told Americans in the past that they need to abolish their Constitution. And I'll show you that in a few minutes.
Donald Trump is the modern embodiment of tyranny that our founders feared the most.
Oh, really?
So don't lecture us about norms.
The tyranny our founders feared the most was large central government like we have today and standing armies, for reasons we see now.
Or typical political practices against a party that nominates and endorses anti-Semites and racists and anti-immigrant zealots. Appeasement and complacency do not work.
This is like political terrorism. They're literally telling half the country who they have to vote for or else. If you vote for the guy we don't like, then you're going to continue to have these problems. So we'll start off with a couple clips from this documentary, Cultural Marxism. Let's get into regular Marxism first.
Take a closer look at this and see exactly how it happened. There was a man named Karl Marx,
who was a lazy piece of shit and lived off Engels' capitalist money for his entire life. The only time he got an actual job, Engels had to help him and translate it in English for him.
Marx got an idea. His idea was that the workers of the world should unite and rise up to counter an evil foe. That foe being capitalism. Capitalism. The idea that people and private companies should be able to own the means of production and be free to earn and have as much as they wished was anathema to Marx. Marx felt the state should own the means of production as well as products produced, and then the state should distribute a fair share of all such products to each and every worker. Thus, in his book, The Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx thundered, "Workers of the world, unite!" Sure that he had a principle to unify all workers in every country, Marx looked forward to eventually taking over the world.
Before we go further, let's see what Marx's contemporaries had to say about him.
I have never seen a man whose bearing was so provoking and intolerable. He was domineering, impetuous, passionate, full of boundless self-confidence. Vain, treacherous, and morose, a powerful, shaggy, untamed old man. These are some of the ways that Marx's contemporaries described him. Marx was a German Jew, studied philosophy and law, married a minor aristocrat, was forced by his political activities to move from Germany to France to Belgium, finally to settle in Britain, where a Prussian police spy described his life. Marx lives in one of the worst, therefore one of the cheapest quarters of London. In the whole apartment there is not one clean and solid piece of furniture. In private life he is an extremely disorderly, cynical human being and a bad host. He leads a real gypsy existence. Washing, grooming, and changing his linen are things he does rarely, and he's often drunk. Though he's often idle for days on end, he will work day and night with tireless endurance when he has a great deal of work to do. Much of Marx's work was done in the British Museum, using this vast library to research and write a complex, far-reaching, interconnected series of books, pamphlets, articles, and manifestos. They're aimed not so much at a moral protest at the evils of capitalism, as at a cool, dispassionate analysis of how capitalism actually works, how it came about, and how it can be changed. For this reason, his key theoretical work is called, not as you might expect, socialism, but Capital. It's a book that the Russian censors pronounced so boring that they let it through, but it's no museum piece. Hidden within its sometimes forbidding prose is the promise of revolution. It was a starting point for a chain of ideas that have inspired a world movement.
A religion, more like.
Workers of all lands unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains, Marx wrote in the Communist Manifesto.
Unfortunately, when World War I broke out, the workers of the world did not unite. In fact, the workers united with their respective countries and fought each other.
What happened was the Marxists had an enormous disillusionment when the French and the Germans and the British workers all rose up for the fatherland and went to war happily, fighting one another.
Marx's idea was a total failure. Workers were more loyal to their respective countries, churches, and cultural values than they were to their counterparts in other countries.
So this is one of the flaws in Marxism. Early Marxists like Edward Bernstein noticed this, and Bernstein thought that they would get their way through democratic means because things were getting better for the working class, whereas Lenin thought that they would need a vanguard to bring in the revolution. And one of the things he said to his brother was, we need to refute Bernstein. So who would be Lenin's vanguard? It would be him and his pals. The cultural Marxist side stems from the Bernstein faction. That's where you get all the have to infiltrate and change culture before you can get Marxism.
Some years after Marx failed, several of his disciples got a new idea on how to take over the world. One of his disciples, Antonio Gramsci, while where else but in prison, wrote up a series of plans, now known as the Prison Notebooks. In this plan, Gramsci announced, the workers of the world will unite only after the Long March is over. The Long March?
Before we go any further, I'm going to throw in a short clip by James Lindsay that gives us a brief background of who translated Gramsci's Prison Notebooks. And you're going to see exactly what I'm talking about with the Democrats being involved with this cultural Marxist movement. I hope you find it as interesting as I do. I know James will say that Gramsci didn't start the Long March, but Gramsci did use that term quite often.
And the collection of things he wrote has been published, is referred to as his Prison Notebooks. They were in Italian, obviously. They were known to the critical theorists in the Frankfurt School. It's likely they would have been known, I don't know for sure, but it's probable that they were known to the French postmodernists. They were not, however, translated into English until 1970. They were translated at Notre Dame by a translating group led by Joseph Buttigieg, who is the father of Mayor Pete Buttigieg, which is an interesting little connection. So one of Gramsci's lines, just to kind of contextualize how he thought about this, was that socialism, this is a quote, socialism is precisely the religion that must overwhelm Christianity. So Gramsci is often credited as the guy who's the Long March Through the Institutions guy, even though he's not the one who called it that. He is the one, however, who should be credited with the development of cultural Marxism.
In other words, they had to get into the culture and change the way of people's thinking. And if people were thinking about patriotism and nation and God and country, that was a mechanism which was too resistant to Marxism. It could never take hold. So you had to erode and destroy that in the individuals. That began what's called the Long March through the institutions, through the seminaries, through the churches, through the media, through Hollywood.
They had to destroy the bourgeois family.
And all the rest of it to create an anti-Christian culture which would destroy the Christian beliefs and convictions in the vast majority of the people, so they would embrace the ideas of Marxism and they would embrace the ideas that they had rejected, and they would be open to a takeover, basically, by Marxists. Now, not political Marxists, but cultural Marxists.
Rather than workers uniting and marching into battle, thus seizing power through force, they would make a long march through the institutions. Institutions like the arts, cinema, theater, literature, schools, college, seminaries, newspapers, magazines, and what is now known as radio, TV, and the mass media. Once this march is over, all the barriers to the acceptance of Marxism will have been quietly and systematically removed.
And they did that to the T. They took over all institutions, colleges, Hollywood.
Let's back up a moment. How did cultural Marxism get into the United States? Some brief history. In 1923, members of the Marxist Communist Party set up an institute at Frankfurt University in Germany. This institute was named the Institute for Social Research. Later, it would become known as simply the Frankfurt School. These new Marxists, under the direction of Max Horkheimer, had seen the old Lenin Marxists fail. The workers of the world did not unite in World War I. Further, they realized why. Antonio Gramsci, the disciple who wrote the prison notebooks, had it right. Marxism could only flourish after a long march through the cultural institutions. Now the mantra would be, change Western culture, and then the workers will unite.
After Marx, there were a group of Marxists who wisely decided that you could bring this collectivist society to a nation through culture as well, by introducing certain values and concepts that would break down the family, for example. If you could somehow break down the family unit so that it was no longer self-sustaining and no longer valued in a society, then that would leave individual members who formerly could turn to the family for support in times of need. They would now be cut loose. They would be without a place to go in times of need. So now they have to turn to the government.
But they turned it into the bourgeoisie being the oppressor and the proletariat being the oppressed.
Just as the march through the institutions was about to begin, an anti-Marxist, anti-Semitic Adolf Hitler ascended to power, and World War II began. Since the leading lights of the Frankfurt School were Marxist, the school packed up its ideology and fled to America, settling down in New York City with the support of Columbia University. But what exactly is the march? And who was marching? What values has the long march through the institutions rolled over? Let's hear it from some of the Frankfurt School graduates themselves.
Now pay attention and notice the similarities between how they speak and every Antifa, mainstream Democrat, and college professor speaks.
Like George Lukács, Antonio Gramsci, Charles Reich, Herbert Marcuse, Theodor Adorno, Erich Fromm, Wilhelm Reich, and Max Horkheimer.
Marx got it all wrong. The workers are not up to being the vanguard of the communist revolution. Let's translate Marxism into cultural terms.
And Herbert Marcuse.
The West is guilty of genocidal crimes against every civilization and culture it has encountered. America and Western civilization are the world's greatest repositories of racism, sexism, nativism, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, fascism, and Nazism. American society is oppressive, evil, and undeserving of loyalty.
In one of Marcuse's most famous works, Repressive Tolerance, from the late 60s, he summarized and made this quote: "Liberating tolerance, then, would mean intolerance against movements from the right and toleration from movements from the left." We're living in his repressive tolerance today.
It's used in some terms, I think, as a sort of the thing that is almost politically correct from a Marxist standpoint. In other words, from a socialist or communist standpoint.
George Lukács.
I see the revolutionary destruction of society as the one and only solution. A worldwide overturning of values cannot take place without the annihilation of the old values and the creation of the new ones by the revolutionary.
Lukács' gift to America later became known as cultural terrorism. Gifts, such as radical sex education in public schools, covering such subjects as free love, outdatedness of monogamy, irrelevance of religion, and the archaic nature of the middle-class family.
Sound familiar? And they call us domestic terrorists for fighting back against this crap they push on our kids. Lukács ran a failed sexual revolution that was cast off by his people, too. Since the beginning, communists have always wanted to destroy the family.
In the Communist Manifesto, you see statements like this: abolition of the family, exclamation mark. Even the most radical flare up at this infamous proposal of the communists. Wow, 1848, abolition of the family was already an infamous proposal of the communists? I mean, this is the programmatic statement, the manifesto of the Communist Party. And already then, even before the manifesto was out, this was known as an infamous proposal of the communists. And they say, one paragraph after that, the bourgeois family will vanish as a matter of course when its complement vanishes, and both will vanish with the vanishing of capital. And then get this, do you charge us with wanting to stop the exploitation of children by their parents? To this crime, we plead guilty.
Women were called upon to rebel against the sexual mores of the day, such being the core values of Christianity and Western culture. His ideas later became the basis for the sexual revolution, embraced by a generation of drug-challenged baby boomers.
When you hear people say, as I did on the campaigns, Pat, what happened to the country we grew up in? Physically, it's the same country, but they're right, we're in another country now. And this is why I think the cultural Marxists have prevailed and are prevailing. They have captured the young. What was the saying in the Abby Hoffman, we're going to capture your children? In a lot of ways they did.
Although Gramsci died in 1937, his prison notebooks lived on as the blueprints to de-Christianize the West.
The civilized world has been thoroughly saturated with Christianity for 2,000 years. Any country grounded in Judeo-Christian values cannot therefore be overthrown until those roots are cut. But to cut the roots, to change culture, a long march through the institutions is necessary. Only then will power fall into our laps like ripened fruit.
And the new generation of freedom-loving, authority-challenged baby boomers were quite willing to accept the bait and take a toke.
Turn on, tune in, drop out.
This whack job asset pusher, Timothy Leary, was a disciple of the biggest Satanist of the early 20th century, Aleister Crowley.
Yes, our prison planner, Antonio Gramsci, had quite a dream. The only way a Marxist revolution could be successful was if the heat shield of capitalism, Christianity, were first destroyed. Charles Reich.
There is a revolution coming. It will not be like revolutions of the past. It will originate with the individual, with culture, and it will change the political structure only as its final act.
Reich thus helped shape the minds of the American 60s youth with his runaway best-selling book, The Greening of America. Gramsci and Marx were now reaching their target audience, and the long march was in progress. Not to be outdone by Karl Marx, a brilliant mind or two at the Frankfurt School soon came up with several of their own ideas, the foremost known as critical theory.
If critical theory sounds familiar to you, it's because it's the foundation that critical race theory, queer theory, and all were built on.
The idea behind critical theory is to challenge all previously accepted standards in every aspect of life from a Marxist perspective. Standards such as Abe Lincoln was honest, home is where the heart is, democracy and capitalism are good, the founders believed in freedom. In doing this, every negative thing one could possibly say about America was dredged up, circulated in books, movies, TV, schools, colleges, and even the clergy, so that the youth would be endlessly indoctrinated. Things like white men killed the Indians, fathers were repressive, God is dead, the founders had slaves.
They did have a problem, which was that although slavery was technically legal throughout all the colonies, only some of the colonies really had slave-based economies. The southern states, Maryland, South, essentially. And therefore they had to deal with the practical problem of how could you integrate these states with the northern and middle colonies, middle states and northern states, in a way that would, as much as possible, unify them. So they had to make some kind of initial political compromises with the social institutions that existed in the southern states. But there was a mindset at the time that slavery would essentially wither away because it was not a practical economic concern in the long run. But it certainly was not a matter that could be criticized from the point of view of principle. You know, the first principle in the preamble is to create a more perfect union. That was their first goal.
And make no mistake that slavery was egregious to many of the founders and was fought against. You had the slave states and what were known as the free states. You had Benjamin Franklin, who was part of the Pennsylvania Abolitionist Society, who helped ban slavery in Pennsylvania as early as 1780. Places like Vermont and their constitution in 1777 also banned slavery, so there was always a fight against it. As he stated, the goal at that time was to form a more perfect union to fight the Brits. And when Jefferson completed his draft of the Declaration of Independence, the southern states would not sign until he removed any anti-slavery rhetoric. And it was said that he sat there writhing as they picked it apart and would not sign. So any anti-slavery writing in it was removed.
But when the consciousness-challenged baby boomers repeatedly heard that the establishment,
what's funny is they became the establishment,
as they came to refer to it, was a bunch of racist, overly religious, sexually deprived sexists who were xenophobic Indian killers and anti-Semites, they internalized the criticisms. Soon their movies and songs began to reflect these values, spreading them throughout the nation's youth culture. Critical theory was doing its job, especially on people like Charles Manson and John Lennon.
Commie John Lennon was also a disciple of the Satanist Aleister Crowley, and Crowley even appeared on the cover of their Sgt. Pepper album.
Even though the reality-challenged baby boomers of the 1960s were the most free, most affluent, and most privileged of any youth in any age, they were bored with their lives.
Which is still the case today, but somehow they're victims and are oppressed.
And swallowed the Frankfurt School's propaganda like a hit of California Sunshine. Books like The Death of the Family, Escape from Freedom, The Mass Psychology of Fascism, The Sexual Revolution, The Joy of Sex, and The Authoritarian Personality flew off the shelves. Counterculture drug movies like The Trip, Easy Rider, The Wild Angels, The Wild Bunch, and Born Loser played theaters endlessly. Books like Authoritarian Personality were particular hits because they attacked the patriarchal family unit, a deeply Christian institution. So along came movies depicting the family unit as sexually repressed and dysfunctional. Movies like Battle of the Sexes, How to Handle Your Wife, Harold and Maude, The Graduate, Bonnie and Clyde, Carnal Knowledge, Bob and Ted and Carol and Alice, Boys in the Band, The Godfather.
Take it easy, The Godfather's a classic.
And Kramer versus Kramer instilled cultural pessimism about families. We, the people, will have thus been indoctrinated or brainwashed into seeing the wisdom of Marxism and the folly of capitalism. Thus, the door to socialism and communism will be open, and the door to a constitutional republic closed. Because the success of cultural Marxism means the demise of the U.S. Constitution.
Destroying the Constitution is absolutely the end goal. It's the only way to get the socialist utopia through. Earlier, I had mentioned the Fabian Socialist. I will show you their founder saying exactly that when he came to visit American socialists in New York.
Constitution is a set of principles. It's based ultimately on a moral code because you go back to the Declaration of Independence. What was the basis for the Declaration of Independence? The law of nature and of nature's God, right? The ultimate moral code. But if you don't follow those principles, If you try, as the expression goes, shave a point off here and there to make a buck or to be reelected, or if you're a special interest group to get some kind of a government subsidy, then the consequences are going to be in the long run deleterious to society as a whole. And there's the difficulty. There are too many people that are thinking in the short term and not applying these principles which are designed to give us a long-term stability to this system.
Now let's hear a founding member of the Fabian Socialists, whose coat of arms was a wolf in sheep's clothing, tell us how we need to abolish our Constitution. Bernard Shaw also said things like, I also made it quite clear that socialism means equality of income or nothing. Under socialism, you would not be allowed to be poor. You would be forcibly fed, clothed, lodged, taught, and employed, whether you liked it or not. If it were discovered that you had not character or industry enough to be worth all these troubles, you might be executed in a kindly manner. He also said, I am a communist, but not a member of the Communist Party. Stalin is a first-rate Fabian. I am one of the founders of Fabianism, and as such, am very friendly to Russia. And this is the guy who's going to tell us that we need to abolish our Constitution for socialism.
It's no good in this country putting questions of national importance to me. I've been here before. I told you what to do and you haven't done it. And you're up to your neck in trouble in consequence. I told you in New York, I put it to you very carefully and exactly. I told you that what you had in doing this country was to abolish your Constitution, which was preventing you from doing anything. And now you see what's happened since. Every attempt you've made to do anything, the Supreme Court immediately stops it and says it's against the Constitution. Well, I tell you again, get rid of your Constitution. But I suppose you won't do it. You have a good president and you have a bad Constitution. And the bad Constitution gets the better of the good president all the time. The end of it will be that you might as well have an English Prime Minister.
We're not done with Shaw yet. That was one of the nicer things he had to say. If you think that was crazy, listen to these next couple quotes that he said in the past.
You must all know half a dozen people at least who are no use in this world, who are more trouble than they are worth. Just put him there and say, sir or madam, now will you be kind enough to justify your existence? If you can't justify your existence, if you're not pulling your weight in the social vote, if you're not producing as much as you consume, or perhaps a little more, then clearly we cannot use the big organization of our society for the purpose of keeping you alive, because your life does not benefit us and it can't be of very much use to yourself.
Bernard Shaw believed in mass killing by category, not usually by racial category, but by category, the idle, the unfit.
Killing off the parasites within society was what Marxian socialism was about.
It demanded in a London newspaper that the scientists should devise a humane gas.
I appeal to the chemists to discover a humane gas that will kill instantly and painlessly. Deadly by all means, but humane, not cruel.
That's the kind of people we're dealing with. All right, back to cultural Marxists and who funds them.
The idea of cultural Marxism came out of the failure of Marxist theory. Marxist theory stated that if Europe was ever entangled in a great war, the working class or proletariat would rise up and overthrow the bourgeoisie government, and all of Europe would be engulfed in a Marxist revolution, which would end in the development of a Marxist utopia. That obviously never happened. Marxist theorists came together in an effort to explain this failure. In 1923, the Institute for Social Research was formed in Frankfurt, Germany. Initially, it was to be called the Institute for Marxism, but they thought it best to camouflage their Marxist identity. The Institute for Social Research eventually became known as the Frankfurt School. After prolonged discussion and study, the scholars of the Frankfurt School decided that the reason for the lack of popular Marxist uprisings was the inherent corrupting influence of capitalism and Western civilization. Western materialism, according to the Frankfurt School, had blinded the masses to their true class interests. They decided the only way to achieve their Marxist revolution was to tear down Western civilization and its individualist culture. To that end, they created what they called critical theory. Critical theory begins with the conclusion that Western civilization is inherently oppressive. This narrative is used to pit various social groups against each other in order to destabilize Western society, with the ultimate goal of bringing down the capitalist free enterprise system. Eventually, scholars from the Frankfurt School made their way to North America, where they spread these venomous ideas. These ideas were elaborated upon by organizations which eventually became funded by the big foundations, wherein cultural Marxism, known today as political correctness, found a vehicle for its promotion and eventually became a mainstay of universities and educational organizations all over the West.
If you ever look into who's funding these people, it always comes back to the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation, and the Carnegie Endowment.
Okay, so why do you suppose fascism is ostracized as so much worse than communism, and communism seems to get a pass ideologically with, I see a lot of people in the Occupy movements and other social movements speaking approvingly of the idea of communism.
When Prince Harry from England wore a swastika, everyone went berserk. Oh no, you can't do that. But every kid on campus has got a Che Guevara t-shirt or Mao t-shirt or some other communist t-shirt, and somehow it's acceptable. Well, I think it's because the intelligentsia in the US and in Canada and in other countries are socialist. And they just see communism as sort of a more extreme version of socialism, whereas they see fascism as totally alien. But I think they're mistaken because except for these superficial differences, economic differences as to who owns BMW or Volkswagen, there really isn't that much difference.
This is a good time to share a clip of Nazi and communist propaganda being compared. This goes to show how similar the two were and how influenced by Stalinism Hitler was and actually used that in his regime. The propaganda is almost identical. Or is identical, rather. Back to cultural Marxism.
So I think you're putting your finger on a very, very important point that on, say, college campuses. There's a communist club in many of them. And if it's not a communist, it's a Marxist-Leninist or whatever the version is. Whereas if you said you wanted to have a Nazi club on a campus, forget it. You couldn't do that. And yet they're both abominations. And I think that this is a failure on the part of the intellectuals who have been bought off by governments.
The left has been successful in pretending that cultural Marxism is some sort of, quote, conspiracy theory. By saying that it's a conspiracy theory, you can get everybody to turn their brains off and leave. That's what they want. They noticed, and they were sociologists, psychologists, educationalists, and well, they were indoctrinators, but they noticed that affiliation with the Communist Party or being a member of the German Communist Party was not working out for them. So they changed their strategy. They took the same Marxist framework and they applied it to society rather than just economics. The guy I really read a lot of was Erich Fromm. So Erich Fromm had 5 or 6 books by him, but you have even in a book that's innocuous, such as The Art of Loving, you get a socialist critique of Western civilization in there.
Cultural Marxism and critical theory have become synonymous with the term social justice. Many colleges and universities in the West offer degrees in social justice and critical theory. One such example is Occidental College in Los Angeles, California, According to the overview of the institution's Critical Theory and Social Justice program, it states,
Critical theory social justice is fundamentally interdisciplinary, drawing on ideas from across traditional academic disciplines. Critical refers to various bodies of theory and method: Marxism, psychoanalysis, the Frankfurt School, deconstruction, critical race studies, queer theory, feminist theory, post-colonial theory.
And there you go. Critical theory, social justice, and critical social justice are all Marxist.
The Critical Theory and Social Justice program at Occidental College includes a course called Whiteness, where students are bombarded with the theory of white privilege, and whites are assigned collective guilt based on their race. The description of this course states,
This course seeks to engage the emergent body of scholarship designed to deconstruct whiteness. It will examine the construction of whiteness in the historic, legal, and economic contexts which have allowed it to function as an enabling condition for privilege and race-based prejudice. Particular attention will be paid to the role of religion and psychology in the construction of whiteness. Texts will include Race Traitor, Critical White Studies, The Invention of the White Race, The Abolition of Whiteness, White Trash, and even The Rat Was White. Emphasis topic: Critical Race Theory.
Social justice indoctrination isn't just restricted to ideologues that seek it out. Programs from literature to criminology include courses that examine and critique society through the lens of cultural Marxism. At Gonzaga University, a core requirement for arts and science majors include at least one social justice course as designated by the Dean of Arts and Sciences. In Canada, social justice is being injected into completely unrelated fields such as criminology. The University of Manitoba's criminology program includes classes with such names as Women, Crime, and Social Justice. The description of the University of Windsor's criminology program states,
In their third and fourth years, students will engage with a variety of specializations in criminology, including criminal justice, penology, law, social justice, policing, victimology, security, youth justice, and deviance.
And therein is how college kids are being made revolutionaries.
Organizations like the Ford Foundation and Rockefeller Foundation funded the first feminist or women's studies university courses.
Philanthropy has played a key role in the growth and institutionalization of women's studies as a scholarly activity.
Miriam Chamberlain, feminist activist and program director at the Ford Foundation from 1971 to 1981.
Modern cultural Marxism that you see, what you see in the last 10 years, especially the last 5 years, I think that the modern feminist movement is what has fueled this new wave of cultural Marxism.
The Rockefeller Foundation continues to promote and fund feminist initiatives, including the Second Global Symposium on Gender in Media. Today's feminists have become a radical parody of themselves, with their petty complaints of microaggressions. Apparently, men taking up too much legroom on public transit is considered sexual oppression. The slightest inconvenience towards women is considered oppression by the patriarchy. Meanwhile, feminists call for the death of all men with impunity.
The current goals of the feminist movement are far different than the original goals. The original goals, I believe, were mostly wealthy women who wanted to be able to own land and such, like their fathers and sons. It's changed beyond equal rights for voting and such. And I think the goals now are to not only control the narrative on most social issues, but I think it's based on misandry to bring women up to a level above men.
In their most recent display of hyperbolic overreaction, feminists brought scientist Matt Taylor, who was part of the Rosetta program of the European Space Agency, to tears. What was this man's great crime against women that provoked a relentless campaign of vitriol and hatred towards him? He simply wore a shirt that offended feminists. What was so awful about this shirt? It was simply a silly shirt.
Feminazis are brutal. They're like one big collective of Karens.
With animated women on it. Instead of celebrating this monumental achievement for humanity, these busy-bodied professional victims obsessed over a shirt. One example of foundations working through universities to further the so-called social justice agenda can be found at the Moody College of Communication at the University of Texas in Austin, a hive of cultural Marxism and social justice indoctrination. The Moody College of Communication was given its name in 2013 when the Moody Foundation in Texas gave a $50 million grant to the University of Texas. Before that, it was simply known as the College of Communication at the University of Texas in Austin.
And there you go, another tax-exempt foundation funding Marxism.
Moody College of Communication hosts talks by wild-eyed feminist bloggers like Roxane Gay, who likes to use edgy-sounding yet meaningless phrases such as the flagrancy of such unchecked capitalism. Which is funny because the last time I checked, we had a very, very regulated market and nothing close to unchecked or laissez-faire capitalism. Her rhetoric plays to her audience of cultural and economic Marxists.
A lot of them are socialists, or they'll call themselves social democrats. In my experience, talking to them about anything that has to do with economics, they don't even have an understanding of what they claim to be.
In one of her articles, Roxane Gay stated,
"It would have been easy, I suppose, to imagine that all white men were like that, brute, taking what they wanted as if it were owed to them. Perhaps I do think that of white men. Some days I cannot be sure."
One can only imagine the uproar if a white man dared to openly ponder such thoughts about people of other ethnicities.
Many of the universities, not just hiring professors that lean left, some of them very, very far left. They bring in special speakers, or they'll have special programs, and a lot of these people are very outspoken, radical feminists.
Assistant Director of Journalism Mary Bach is also a member of the university's Center for Gender Studies, which includes various social justice advocates and cultural Marxists. Graduates from the Moody College of Communication include people in prestigious positions within the media and the government. This includes the executive producer of ABC Network's The View, high-ranking positions within the Department of Homeland Security, as well as the executive vice president of Xbox Entertainment Studios. Many graduates from the Moody College of Communication go on to prestigious careers in influential positions, so it's worth exploring the influences which shape the young minds that in turn go on to shape our society.
Most professors, when they talk about Marxism, it is in the curriculum. When they talk about feminism, it's in the curriculum. When it comes to Marxism, they will usually, instead of outright saying, this is the ideology you should all accept, they will talk about it in a way that promotes it. In fact, my lecture this morning, we were talking about Marxism, and my professor was talking about if you were working at Walmart and you are getting paid a salary and your boss is getting paid a profit from Walmart. That's unfair. You should probably be getting a profit as well since you are part of the company. This would be an idea of Marxism that is a good idea. They'll keep telling me they're coming from a non-biased point of view, yet the words they speak and the way they defend the ideology says that's not true.
School boards all over Canada and the United States are pushing the philosophy of race baiting and identity politics. Students in Wisconsin were asked to wear white wristbands in recognition of their so-called white privilege.
That's sick.
In the politically correct world of cultural Marxism, there are the oppressed and oppressors. If you are white, male, or straight, you are part of the oppressing class.
Intersectionality.
I went to a public school named Walnut Grove Secondary, and I started in about grade 9. We did a whole class on the underlying racism in our culture. One of the classes that was the most frustrating for me was racism in the English language and how we need to abolish it. So racism in the English language was a class where we had to put things up on the board where we had to talk about associations with words. I'd say light and someone else would say dark. I'd say, if I said blackmailed, that has a negative connotation. Darkness has a negative connotation, all this. And they're associated with skin color and how all of these words that have dark, black, shade, or shadow have a negative connotation. And even another kid in the class put up their hand and said, doesn't this not have anything to do with skin color, but more to do with light and dark, as in the sun versus being in a dark cave, not racism in the English language? And our teacher would just shoot it right back at us and say, absolutely not. This 100% has everything to do with race, and these words need to be abolished. They need to be taken out of the English language.
These are the social ethics being taught in the schools of the Toronto District School Board. In a resource guide given to Toronto District teachers titled An Educator's Guide to Changing the World, it states,
"We want to emphasize that our identity is socially constructed and de-emphasize the role of personal choice and agency. This is key. We are asking them to consider that their lives are largely a function of their identity, their gender, race, class, etc. This identity is not something they can control. It is typically something we are born into and unlikely to change. Just as their own accomplishments are tied to their identity, so too is everyone else's accomplishments, or lack thereof, tied to their identity."
By personal agency, they mean personal responsibility. They want to teach children that they are not responsible for their lot in life, but it is only their identity that determines their success. The guide refers to social mobility, that is, the idea of improving one's circumstances through hard work and ingenuity as a false hope for moving up the economic ladder. Never is effort or personal responsibility given any credit for one's circumstances in the politically correct dogma of cultural Marxism. Instead, class, race, gender, and sexual orientation are given to be the only real determiners. An ideology of victimhood and disempowerment is pushed to manipulate people into thinking the only way for them to have wealth is to take it from somebody else, instead of inspiring them to create it for themselves.
How dare we, as free, liberty-loving Americans, stand back and do nothing, even for our children's sake, as they do this?
So they actually introduced the social justice class to our school in my grade 12 year, and I decided to take it, and this is something that they're hoping
doing this to kids.
Make a mandatory class. First class we did, we were taken out into the hallway and told to stand in a line. They told us, if you are white, go stand at the lockers to your left. If you are of any other color, go stand to the lockers to your right. Now, look at the separation. Look at how there are so many more white people on one side and so many few other people on the other side. You are privileged for this. Then they put us back in the line and they said, go to one side. If you are straight, go to one side. If you are gay, and you did that as well, and they would see the disparity. And they did this for multiple other topics, essentially anything that could possibly be controversial. They separated us on and then told us, you are privileged, you are not privileged, and put that label on you.
In 2010, Racism Free Edmonton declared that white people must acknowledge their white privilege and that white Canadians have likely harmed non-white people with our own whiteness. Racism Free Edmonton is a collaboration of 16 other organizations, including various educational organizations such as the University of Alberta, Grant MacEwan University, Norquest College, King's University College, Edmonton Catholic Schools, and Edmonton Public Schools. In fact, the CEO committee of Racism Free Edmonton is almost exclusively represented by people working in the education sector. The social justice movement is incredibly anti-capitalist and somehow believes that under a state-managed economy such as communism, they would be more economically prosperous, even though history shows the opposite is true.
Communism in itself is a ridiculous theory that has not worked. Over 100 million people were killed by communism in the 20th century alone. Capitalism has never killed anybody. Now you could say that the US government has killed a lot of people, but that's not capitalism. That's fascism and communism combined. So the true problem here is the government and the central banks. People need to realize that it is not capitalism. Capitalism is a great thing. Capitalism has created everything that we have today. Every single great thing you have in your life, whether it be a car or an air conditioner or clean water in your house or whatever it may be, it all came from capitalism. A lot of the people, especially communists, will always come out and say, look, you're not making very much money, you're getting poorer every year, which is true for most people in the US, and then they'll say it's capitalism. But it's not capitalism. That is not what it is. Capitalism, remember, is only the voluntary trade of services and transactions between two parties.
Have we learned nothing from East Germany and West Germany, from North Korea and South Korea, from the failure of the Soviet Union? What they did is they nationalized most of everything. It's really stupid to entrust things to people who, if they make a mistake, don't suffer from it. Well, take the post office. When they make a mistake and they lose, what is it, 16 billion a year or something? I'm not sure of the exact numbers. Did they personally lose out on this? Did they go bankrupt? No. They just get more money from taxes.
It's a conspiracy. It's the capitalist hetero-patriarchy.
The first term, capitalism, is usually used to understand and sometimes to critique a particular economic system, whereas the second term, patriarchy, refers to social systems where men dominate women. And in sociology,
you could see how neurotic they are in their body language.
In the 1970s, when feminist scholars began to critique existing Marxist theories of inequality by arguing that those theories didn't, which focused upon paid labor as a site of inequality and exploitation. The argument was that theories of capitalism didn't take into account the specificity of women's experiences. So whereas Marxist critiques of capitalism examine the division of labor, and especially paid labor, theories of patriarchy often take the sexual division of labor as its starting point. And this sexual division of labor was actually, it was posited that the sexual division of labor came prior to capitalism and actually served as a kind of template or a model for exploitation out of which capitalism is going to grow. So, and these were theories that people were working with and looking at historical data, in particular in the 1970s.
What then is the alternative to collectivism in all of its forms? Self-ownership. The radical idea that every human being, regardless of their ethnicity or gender, own themselves, and no other person or entity has any lawful claim over our lives or our property. The implication of this concept is, regardless of the challenges we face as individuals, it is up to ourselves to meet these challenges head-on and to conquer them, instead of claiming a victim status based on our identity.
The free enterprise philosophy, or libertarianism, the way I see it, is really two sides of a coin, or two basic premises. One is the non-aggression principle. You got to keep your mitts to yourself unless you have other people's permission. And the only legitimate acts are voluntary ones between consenting adults.
If I own the effects from my labor, it follows then that if I make something creatively from an unowned resource, if I homestead some property, then that becomes mine.
And libertarians of the Rothbardian version, of which I'm a follower,
This is one side of
predicate private
libertarianism.
property rights on homesteading. The first guy to mix his labor with the virgin land gets to own it. And then any other property titles are justified based on homesteading plus legitimate title transfers, such as anything voluntary, buying, selling, renting.
Now, who else knows better how to deal with that which I've created, how to deal with my own body and myself than I do? And so liberty leads to prosperity because exactly that, because I don't know how best to govern anyone else's life. You know better than I do how to govern your life, and it would be immoral for me to force my will on you.
In order to know whether something is aggression or not, you have to have private property rights, because suppose I would have grabbed your pen. Is this aggression? Is this theft, or is it not? Well, it all depends upon who owns the pen. If you stole that pen from me yesterday and now I'm just grabbing it back, well then I'm the good guy and you're the bad guy. On the other hand, if you've always had that pen and now I grab it, then I'm the bad guy.
This idea of self-ownership is the idea that you are an individual. You're unique. You are not just a cog in a wheel of some greater thing. You're an end unto yourself. The idea of ownership also says what others should do. So it says that others don't own you. They're excluded from owning you. So that's what adding ownership is. It's recognizing the fact that you control yourself and that others should not control you. They should not have a say, a stake in how you move about this earth, what you put into your body, how you build property. The only time that they should have a stake in it is if it affects them personally. So, in other words, your ownership stops where another person's ownership begins. And so we need to really get a handle on how we define where that boundary is, where I stop and you start. And if we can't get a handle on that, then we run into all sorts of problems. If different people have a different idea where they stop and you start, then we run into conflict, we run into war, we run into death, we run into aggression, and all the things that diminish life. The philosophy of liberty is this: it's recognizing that you are a unique individual, that you own yourself, that no one else has a claim on your life above and beyond your claim on your own life, and that we ought to respect each other, that we ought to love each other, really, if you want to take it a step further. That's what liberty has come to mean for me, but I should create this powerful attraction, this ball of virtue, of positivity, of value to other people. And that's what you could call that entrepreneurship. And that to me is what liberty is. It's defining who I am and respecting others and creating value in this world.
All right, this got really long, so I'm going to end part one there. What they got in towards the end was first cultural Marxism, then more of liberty. And what they were promoting was kind of conservative or capitalist libertarian. There's two kinds of libertarians. There's the open border, lefty types that want abortions and all that. And then there's this kind, which is more of the capitalist libertarians. So we'll end that episode here. Next, we'll get into the boots on the ground Antifa types of radical leftists who basically burnt down our cities. We'll also get into communist policies, what they do whenever they come into power. And we'll get into liberty eventually. And we'll also talk a little bit about anarchy. So we'll end it here, but I do want to leave you guys with a clip from a video I watched on this YouTube channel. So I'll leave you guys with that because I think it's very relevant to everything we've talked about previously in part one. I'll see you guys in part two.
The exact form in which this war starts is incredibly important. In retrospect, whether this turns into a civil war, revolution, or international war will be obvious, but it won't be to us. For example, slight tilts in the military's loyalty will determine how the war goes. If almost all of the military defects to the right, it'll be like the French Revolution, where the right just slaughters the left. Otherwise, if it's more, it could be like the previous American Civil War, being a real war with campaigns that take years, as the military is balanced. A situation in which the right could very easily lose is one in which there's a rebellion that's too early, which is very clearly illegal. What I know about the military is that they are thankfully loyal to the law. If the rightist rebels are very clearly in the wrong, the military, which in most cases tilts right, will just crush it. This would then make the entire right look like traitors. The left could use this to legally crush the rebellion in its entirety, using charges of insurrection. This is why I've told the right repeatedly to not rebel out of the blue. The left's greatest trick is baiting the right into hazard. The left's psychology is female and the right's is male. Women will do low-level aggression much more than men. They lie more, spread more rumors, insult more, and non-violent action. Men tend to go from 1 to 10, in that guys are either friends or they're beating the crap out of each other. I think the left is trying to agitate the right so much so that the right has to do something crazy so that the left can get a consensus that the right is dangerous. It's effectively a wife begging her husband to beat her again and again so that when he actually does do so, she can take him to court as an abuser. The sad thing is that in our society, she can just say that he beat her without any evidence and the court will believe it. I know a couple of people that happened to. We all need to be very careful over the next year. For normal people, keep your eyes open for when these decisive shifts might happen. If you're a blue person in Texas or a red person in California, try to figure out when a good time would be to get out for your own safety. Lots of death happens in civil wars, and people hate the other side. Think of all the Jews in Poland in 1939 who considered fleeing, then thought of how all their family, work, and friends were there. They then died at Auschwitz. It was so horrible they couldn't predict it, but that didn't stop it from happening. This also all happened within living memory. For people in power watching, be careful of traps that the other side might be placing. You have the weight of history on your shoulders. For all of us in these hard times, we must do our duty and stay honorable. My father said to me growing up, "Rudyard, there are certain hills that you have to die on to be a man. At the end, you will be judged whether or not you stood where you needed to stand."